result of this of the class, in the sense the more you learn, the more sensitive you will be to the halacha. Okay, welcome back, Solomon. We missed you. Welcome back. Okay, we are on Mem Zayin of a base 47b. About 2 lines from the top. Masa Sheni, 2 lines, 47b. Masa Sheni vehegdish. Do. We said, the Mishnah said that Masa Sheni and Hegdish. I'm sure everybody saw it. Everybody saw your text because we don't have to. Not too many people came on yet. So you want to resend it just to Masa Sheni and Hegdish. As we said, Masa Sheni is 10% of your produce. You need to go ahead. There's a cycle of this. There's a series of years that lead up to the Shemitah. There's a 7-year cycle. So on the 1st and 2nd and 4th and 5th of that cycle, there's a mitzvah called Masa Sheni. That after you give 10% to the Levi, you take 10% and you bring it to Jerusalem, to the old city, and you eat it in the old city. If you find that it's too heavy for you to go ahead and carry the Masa Sheni, the produce, what you do is you go ahead and you redeem it onto coins, and then you take the coins to the old city. And then you buy food from those coins and eat the food in the old city. But if you don't bring the actual produce itself and you redeem it, the Torah says you have to add a fifth. Similarly, if let's say you go ahead and you say, I want to make hegdish, I want to sanctify this produce.
Rabbi, good morning.
Good morning, Aaron. Shalom Aleichem.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, everyone. If you want to sanctify, we're so happy you're back. If you want to sanctify the produce, and you say, I'm going to make this produce hegdish. So what does it mean? I'm making the produce hegdish. The produce is not a korban. You have to be born in the mizbeach. So you go ahead and that means that you have to give it to the gabai, the gizbar of the hegdish, and they'll collect it, and it belongs to the hegdish, and hegdish could do what they want with it. It belongs to hegdish. Now, if you want to redeem it, you want to keep it for yourself. So you redeem it, you redeem that produce, and you add a fifth to hegdish. So now the Mishnah said regarding zimun, if you had this produce that was Masa Sheni produce, and you redeemed it, meaning it was you separated from Masa Sheni, then you redeemed it onto coins, then you have a right to eat that that produce outside of Jerusalem, and you ate it, and you were because it's no outside of Jerusalem because it's no more holy. It's not sanctified. You took off the holiness. You redeemed it. And then what happened was you sat with a zimun with 2 other people. They could count you into the zimun. Or if you redeemed the hegdish, they could count you into the zimun. So the Gemara's question is pshita. It's obvious. Of course you can count them into the zimun. Why not? Everything was done right. Solomon, is the Gemara clear what the Gemara is asking? Yeah. Pshita. Good morning, Shmuel. Good to see you. So the Gemara says, morning, he gave the principle, he didn't redeem it properly, meaning he redeemed it. Here we have a pidyon. I've been in the synagogue today, a redemption. But the redemption, similar, interesting, like the redemption over there of the young man, he originally was redeemed by his grandfather. His grandfather does not have the mitzvah of redemption, so therefore it wasn't a good redemption. Therefore they had to do it again. And here the Gemara says that here the redemption was a good redemption, but he did not do it. He didn't fill all the requirements of the redemption. There's redeeming the produce onto coins, and also to add a fifth. And he didn't add the fifth. That's the case of the Gemara. So now that he didn't add the fifth, you might have thought that if he eats with you, you can't count him into the zimun because there was something wrong that was done regarding this food, because the food wasn't redeemed in the proper way, so to speak. Because let's say the food was worth $100. Let's say you're supposed to give $120, redeem it onto $120 of coins, but you're supposed to add a fifth. They did not redeem it onto $120 worth of coins. You redeemed it onto $100 worth of coins, similar to hegdish. You might have thought that you cannot count them in for the for the zimun. So therefore comes the mission to tell us you could count them in for the zimun. And the chidush is that the fact that he did not give the fifth does not hold back the pidyon. The pidyon, the redemption, is considered a redemption, even if you don't give the fifth. You just violated a halacha. You're supposed to give your fifth, and you did not do it the way you were supposed to do it. Sometimes in life, people do some things, they don't do it the right way, they still get credit, but they missed out on something that they should have done. It's like a guy goes ahead, then he puts on a talit or tefillin, and he doesn't say a bracha. He got credit, he put on the talit or tefillin, but he didn't do the way you're supposed to. You say a bracha before you put on the talit. You say a bracha before you tie the tefillin. So sometimes you got credit for the mitzvah, but you missed out on something that you should have done. Okay. Now the Gemara continues. Hashama she'achol kazayit. We had the waiter, right? Solomon, you have the Gemara? Yeah. Shama she'achol kazayit. We had the waiter who ate a kazayit. The Mishnah said, what did you say? You said, what? Oh, sorry. The Mishnah said, Hashama she'achol kazayit. I don't mind, you could say. No, you can say, yeah, no problem. No problem. Hashama she'achol kazayit. The shamash that ate a kazayit. What happened was you had a waiter, and the waiter ate the kazayit. He ate an olive size of food, right? So, and the Mishnah says if the shamash, that waiter, ate a kazayit, it's fine, correct? That's what you can count them in to the zimun. Now we all know a kazayit. When it comes to achila, eating, a kazayit is the general amount that we refer to as eating in general. There are exceptions to the rule. It's just like Yom Kippur. If a person eats a kazayit the size of a olive on Yom Kippur, he will not get that serious punishment of karet, only if he eats a little more than that, like the size of a date. So Yom Kippur, the eating is different because it comes from a different. The pasuk has, because of the language of the pasuk, the way the prohibition is written. But in general, when the Torah talks about eating, when the Torah says you have to eat matzah on Pesach, how much is that you have to eat on Pesach? A kazayit, right? If you have, a challah on Shabbat, you have to know in order to say birkat hamazon, to say benching birkat hamazon, how much you have to eat? A minimum of a kazayit, an olive size, which is around 1 ounce. 1 ounce. What was that? How many grams is that? 28 grams. What is that? How many grams is an ounce? Anybody know offhand? An ounce, the size of how many grams is an ounce? So I'm saying you need a slice of bread. You eat a slice of bread. You can't say birkat hamazon if you just take a little bite of bread. You can't say birkat hamazon. You have to have a kazayit. We spoke about that. The importance of, right? You hear that, Akiva? We spoke about the women. The women who are very diet conscientious, sometimes they take a little bite of the hamotzi, but they don't have a kazayit, and that's a problem because they cannot go ahead and eat the other foods if they don't have. If by the end of the meal, if you're not going to have a kazayit within a certain amount of time, like we also spoke about, you have to have a certain amount of minutes. You can't just eat the kazayit over a very long period of time. Some say, some say maybe 7 minutes. There are different opinions. 4 minutes. How within how long you should have the kazayit. But the point is, that eating is generally referred to as a kazayit, the size of an ounce. So if you eat a kazayit, so that you had a proper eating. So if you had a proper eating, so therefore you should be able to be included into the zimun. So what's the chidush? What's the Mishnah teaching us? That the shamash, the waiter, ate a kazayit, you could join him in. Of course, if you ate a kazayit, of course you could join him in. So the Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious. So the Gemara says, right, by the way, Yaron, right? You're making sure that your wife has the kazayit on Shabbat by the meal, Yaron. You're making sure? Yaron, do you hear me? I don't know if you hear me now. So the Gemara says, Pshita. So the Gemara says, Yaron, you heard what I said or not?
No, I didn't hear, Rabbi.
I said, are you making sure that your wife eats the kazayit at the Shabbat
bread,
table? What?
Yeah, on the Shabbat table, right?
Yes. So the Gemara says, Pshita, Mao the Tema Shamash lo kavah. You might have thought that the shamash, that the waiter, is not considered bikviyut. It's not considered part of the group because he's always getting up and he's getting down and he's on the move. And the din of zimun is shlosha she'achlu ka'achat. When three people come together, you're eating together. You're eating as a group. But if one of the members is a shamash, one is a waiter, is he really part of the group? Or he's here and there and everywhere? You know, he's not sitting down. You're not sitting down, right? You hear sound what the Gemara is saying? So you might have thought that you hear that? You might have thought you cannot count the waiter into the group. And that's what the Gemara's chidush, that the waiter, if he sits down with you, if he eats with you, even though he's going and coming and going, he's on the move, he's still considered part of the zimun. You could count them in. Kamash Malan, that's the chidush of the Mishnahs. That's what the Mishnah is coming to teach us by telling us that. Now the Gemara continues. Kuti. The Kuti were a group of Kuthites. They went ahead and they converted to Judaism, and there was a lot of trouble eventually from them because we say hello to you. It's been a long time. Hello, you who has joined us. There's a big machloket, there's a big discussion if the Kutim were really kosher converts or not. So some say they were not kosher converts. They never really threw away, they didn't throw away the Avodah Zarah. And when they converted, they were still not accepting Hashem properly. And others say that they were good converts. The conversion was a kosher conversion, but then they went bad later on by going ahead and worshiping idols and so on and so forth. And therefore they became like Goyim eventually. They threw away the Torah. Even though once you convert, you're always a Jew, but the way they conducted themselves eventually like Goyim. They worshiped idol worship and all different things. But the time of the Mishnah, the Gemara is teaching us that the Mishnah is of the opinion that at least at that time, we still treated them, we held like the opinion that they were true Gerim, true converts, and that they had the status, we treated them like every other Jew. And we'll have to see regarding which laws. But we treated them like other Jews, because if they would be a goy, a non-Jew, they cannot be part of the zimun, right? You can't join a non-Jew to the zimun. So therefore, the Mishnah stated that it's teaching us akuti, because the Gemara's question was, that's what the Mishnah seems to say, that you can count the kuti. We welcome Mike. Good to see you, Mike. That we can count the kuti.
Hi, Rabbi.
Morning. That we can count the kuti to the zimun. So that seems to be the Mishnah is telling us an important point, because you might have thought, because there was a great controversy regarding the kutim, and you would not have known that you could count them to the zimun. So the Mishnah comes to teach us you can count this kuti to the zimun. So the Gemara trying to understand what's pshat. We welcome who just came. Was that Morris is back? The Gemara trying to understand this law. How could you count the kuti in? The Gemara says like this: Amai, you tell me hakuti mizamden alav. You can tell me that you count these Kuthites. So even if you're telling me that they converted to Judaism and they're considered kosher converts, Amai lo ye'ela ama aretz, he should be. He's not greater than Amoretz. And Amoretz, let's say, we generally translate it as a very uneducated Jew. And when a person's uneducated, it comes with it other things as well. So let's see whether regarding laws and so on and so forth, his uneducation regarding Torah laws. So lo ye'ema Amoretz Tanya, and we learned in a Braita, ein mizamnim al Amoretz. We cannot count an Amoretz into a zimun. You cannot count such a person into a zimun. Now, we're going to see it's interesting. There's a base that takes it to the Ein Mishpat. Solomon, you see that base, Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah? And what does that base take you? What does that base say?
One of the debates, Rabbi, if you really think about it, we can.
What do you say, Yosef Atzadik?
The main debate is like why we cannot count Am Haaretz on Zimun, but we can count on him to be a minyan, to say Kaddish or to say Kedusha or to do anything.
Very good. Great question. So if you look at the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah Beis, what does he say? Va'idna mizamnin. Today we do count the Am Haaretz into Zimun. And that's what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says you count the Am Haaretz. And what's the reason for it? So the Chafetz Chaim says, because if you will not count the Am Haaretz, then they would leave Judaism completely. So that seems to be.
And Rabbi, that's why you have to say the Birkat Hamazon out loud, like that the Am Haaretz can hear the bracha that you're saying.
I mean, if he doesn't know how to say Birkat Hamazon, and you're doing a zim, and you can say it out loud, so he can fulfill his mitzvah. If you have a person who doesn't know how to say Birkat Hamazon, you say it out loud. So it's just interesting that the Chafetz Chaim says the reason is that we're afraid that if they're not going to join him in, he's going to leave the community completely. Okay. So let's see the Gemara. And the Gemara will elaborate on this. In the time of the Gemara, they did not join him into the Zimun. Why? The Gemara says V'tanya Ein Mizamin Al Haaretz. You cannot join an Am Haaretz into the Zimun. So Abaye answers, how could we count them in? Bikuti Chaver. We're talking about a kuti that was learned, that we know he keeps the mitzvot. Meaning to say, what was the problem? Why couldn't you join the Am Haaretz into the Zimun? Because he wasn't keeping Torah and mitzvot. He was uneducated. He was not keeping the Torah and mitzvot. And so here we're talking about an Am Haaretz that does keep. We're talking about the kuti, meaning the Gemara's question was, a kuti should be like an Am Haaretz. It's not educated. These people that converted, they weren't educated. They weren't learned, and it seems like these kutim. Now, usually, when a person converts to Judaism, they study first, and they know and they learn. That's why it's a whole process before a person converts to Judaism. But this group, it seems that maybe subsequently, maybe the first generation accepted the Torah and they knew, but then subsequent generations within these groups of the kutim, they weren't learned. They weren't educated. And they weren't keeping Torah and mitzvot. So if they're not keeping Torah and mitzvot, we're not going to count them into the. They're not. You don't count them in to the zimun. The people who are not keeping the Torah and the mitzvot. This special bracha of coming together was a coming together of people who keep Torah and mitzvot. If they're not keeping Torah and mitzvot, originally they will not count them into the zimun. So the Gemara says, like we said, subsequently we say we do count them into the zimun, but originally we will not count them into the zimun. So Abaye says the Mishnah, when it says the kuti, there were different types of kutim. There were certain kutim that will learn it, that did keep the mitzvot properly. So therefore, that type of kuti, you could count them in. That's what the Mishnah says. Hakuti, the Mishnah says, if he's learned, you can count them in, even though there's opinions that say that kutim, their conversion was not a good conversion. They weren't real converts. Comes the Mishnah to say that they have a status of kosher converts, and therefore you could count them in if he's learned. That's Abaye. Abaye Amar Bekuti Chozer. Rava has a different answer. He says, Afilu Tema Bekuti Amaretz. The Mishnah could be talking about Akuti Amaretz. That when the Mishnah says Kuti, because you have to understand, the Mishnah did not clarify which type of Kuti we're referring to. It's Kuti, which sounds like any Kuti you could join in. So but which type of Kuti? Meaning whether he's, which type, but why? Because we're talking about the Kutim. The Gemara says, Ba'amoretz the Rabbanan. You see, the Kutim, there are certain mitzvot that they kept very well. The mitzvah, things that were written in the Torah, they were very careful about. Things that were not written in the Torah, take a Sammy, they were not careful about. There's a lot of Torah that's not written in the Torah. There's a lot of Torah Shabbat Peh. There's a lot of oral law that we have in Judaism, and things that, and therefore, and since this mitzvah of maaser and certain things, tithing, they followed the laws of tithing and so on and so forth, and therefore you could be assured that the food that they ate was the tithes were taken off. So therefore, if he eats with you, you could go ahead and join him into the zimun, because what's called, so the Gemara says, because the Chachamim understand, when we say you can't count an Amoretz into the zimun, the Amoretz that you can't count is someone who does not take off his masrot properly. That's called an Amoretz. And if you don't take off your tithes properly, that's what the Chachamim were referring to when they say you can't count them as zimun. And he does take on the Kusim, this group, it says like that you'll have a Gemara in Chulin that talks about matzah. I think the Gemara says that the Kutim were very careful in matzah to prepare the matzah properly. Other things they were not so careful in, but certain things that were written in the Torah, clearly they were careful, and therefore they don't have the status of Amoretz, and therefore you could go ahead and therefore you could count them in to the Simon. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, have a great day. Thank you so much for being here. The pligi aleha, the Gemara says, the pligi aleha d'rameya skinan. We're talking about the Amoretz of the Chachamim of the Rabbanan that argue on Rameya. What do we say? The Tanya. We have a Braita. The Braita says the following. The Braita says, Ezehu Amoretz. When is a person called an Amoretz? When is a person referred to as an Amoretz? Kol she'ena ochel chulav b'tahara. Someone who doesn't eat his chulin b'tahara. Chulin means things that are not holy. Like we say, hamavdil be'kodesh l'chol. Hashem separates between holy and not holy, right? And chulin is not holy food. It's not, meaning truma is holy food. You have to treat it with a certain way. You can't make it tamei. Truma cannot become tamei. Your regular food does not have to be eaten b'tahara. You can make it tamei. You can make it tamei. However, there were certain people who were very careful to eat even their non-holy food in a way of tahara, to make sure that the food was tahar. So an Amoretz is someone who's not careful about that. Kol shein ochel chulav b'tahara. He doesn't eat it b'tahara because he's not on that level to separate from contaminating this his food. Divrei Rav Meir. The Chacham say that's not called the Amoretz. That's not called the Amoretz. Because really, there's no halacha that you have to eat your non-holy food in the status of purity. Rather, they say, Kol she'ena maseh peirotav kiroi. A person who does not take off the fruit, the masrot, the tithes on his fruit. We have the obligation, the Torah obligates you to take off your tithes on your fruit. If you don't take off the tithes properly, the maseh, that's called an Amoretz. Divrei, that's Amoretz. Bahani kutai, and these kutim, Isurei Masrei Kidachazi. They take off properly. They take off the tithes properly. The Mamai Dixibo right there, something that's written in the Torah, Mizha Zihiri. They are very careful about those mitzvot that are written in the Torah. The Omar Mar, Kol Mitzvah Shel Zikabo Kutim. Any mitzvah that the Kutim, you see, they're not going to be careful. Any of the Rabbanans, they're not going to be careful. But any mitzvah that the Kutim were careful about, Harbe Medaktikim Boyotem Yisrael. They're even more careful than the Jewish people, than the Jews from birth. The Kutim, who became those converts, the mitzvot that they were keeping properly. Now, the law is when you become a convert, you have to accept all mitzvot. If you don't accept, if a person says, I want to accept all mitzvot except one, that's not a good conversion. But they obviously had to have accepted all the mitzvot originally, and then they became lax in performance of only the mitzvot that were written in the Torah. They obviously had to accept originally all the mitzvot of the Torah and all the mitzvot of the Rabbanan, and then they became lax in it. But the things that they remained strong, they were even stronger than the Jews from birth. They even medaktik in bo Yosem Yisrael. They're even more careful about it, more than even the average Jew. And therefore, Masrot was one of those things, since it's written in the Torah, and they're very careful. The average Kuti is very careful about something that's written in the Torah, and therefore we know that he took proper Masrot, and therefore he's not considered an Amoretz, and therefore you can count them in the Kutim into the Zimun. Tana Rabbanan. Now the Gemara now brings many different opinions on what's called an Amaretz. When the Chachamim, when the rabbis talk about an Amaretz, and the Amaretz obviously is someone who is not on the same level as a learned, as an educated man. What are we referring to? Who is this person that's called an Amaretz? And there's certain laws regarding the Amaretz. Tana Rabbanan. We saw one law that you can't count them into a Zimun, an Amaretz. But the question is, what's called an Amoret? So we just had two definitions. One definition was someone who does not eat his food in status of purity. The other definition is someone who does not take off his masrot properly, doesn't take off his tithes. That's called an Amoret. And now we have another term. Kol she'eno korei kriya shema avit v'shachrit. A person who doesn't read Shema. He doesn't read the Shema in the morning and the evening. A guy who doesn't read the Shema, he doesn't know how to read. He doesn't know to say the Shema. So someone who doesn't read the Shema, a person who doesn't every morning and every evening say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Someone who does not say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, doesn't know about Shema, he doesn't say it, that person is called an Amoretz. The language of the Gemara is, even if he knows what it's about, but if he doesn't say it, that in itself also sounds like from the Gemara, he's called an Amoretz. It shows you his lower level that he's missing. It's very low level as a Jew. The language of the Gemara seems to indicate a Jew who doesn't say Shema in the morning, a Jew doesn't say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. It doesn't say it in the evening as well. That's an Amoretz. That's something meaning is it because he's so uneducated or so not committed? Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua omer kol mi she'eina miniach tefillin. A person who doesn't put on tefillin, and the Maharsha says, even if he says the Shema, but if he doesn't put on tefillin, in the Shema it says, to tie it to your hands. It doesn't put on tefillin. That's bad news. That's a very low level. He has the status of a Amoretz. Ben Azai Omer. Ben Azai says, Kol mi she'ein lo tzitzit b'bigdo. You go ahead and you have a four-cornered garment. There's no tzitzit. Meaning the Torah's obligation to put on tzitzit is when you have a four-cornered garment. So we go ahead and we buy a four-cornered garment to put it on. We buy a talit to put on. But if a person would be wearing a four-cornered garment, which we generally don't, unless we go buy a pair of tzitzit or talit, if you're wearing a four-cornered garment and you don't put on tzitzit, that's an amaretz. He's not careful about this mitzvah. When the Torah says you have a four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzit. That's called an am haaretz. By the way, we recommend everyone should go out to a store and buy a pair of tzitzit and wear it the whole day. You get a mitzvah every moment. Every moment that you hear that, everybody on the screen. Everybody hears what I'm saying. Every moment you're wearing a tzitzit, you get a mitzvah. Anybody have any comment on that statement? You're getting a mitzvah every second of the day. Yosef Tzaddik, what do you say? Mike Dahan, what do you say? What do you say to that every second of the day when you're wearing your tzitzit? Yaron, every second you're wearing your tzitzit, you get a mitzvah. What do you say?
Shield.
I can't hear you.
I said it's like a shield.
It's a shield. It's a mogain. It says Torah. It says mitzvah protects. Yaron, you hear me? Every second you wear your tzitzit. Mike, every second you wear your tzitzit. You, Eshmuel, everybody, every second you wear your tzitzit, you're doing a mitzvah. Because the Torah says a four-cornered garment, you wear tzitzit. So you go ahead and you buy yourself a four-cornered garment, you get a mitzvah. Have a great day. So you get a mitzvah every time you're wearing it. And the Gemara, then the Gemara continues. Rab Nassan Omer, Kol she'ei mezuzah al pischo. When the Chacham talk about Amaretz, if someone does not have a mezuzah on his door, that's called an Amaretz. He doesn't have a mezuzah on his door, he's considered a Amaretz. And then that's how that shows the low status that he's in. Rav Nosson by Yosef Omer, Kol mi sheyesh lo banim. If a person is blessed with children, with sons, ve'eino megadlam l'talmud Torah, and he doesn't send them to yeshiva, he doesn't teach them Torah, that's an amoretz. That's an amoretz that we're talking about, because you have sons, you have a mitzvah to teach them Torah. And the Achirim Omrim, Achirim say, you know what's called an Amoretz? Achirim Omrim, Afilu Korah V'Shana. Even if he read Chumash and he learned Mishnayot, V'lo Shimesh Talmid Chachamim. But if he did not learn under Torah scholars, if he did not go to a rabbi to give him a class in the Gemara, to explain the Mishnah. What does the Gemara do? It explains the Mishnah. If he doesn't understand the reason for the Mishnah, he learns the Mishnah, he learns the Pasuk, but he doesn't understand what's behind the law. He doesn't understand the reason for the law, the source for the law. Because the Mishnah is just the bottom line, the law. If he did not go to a rabbi to give him a class to explain the law, that's an Amharet. That's an uneducated Jew that the Chacham were talking about. That certainly his status is not regarding certain laws. We're going to consider him an Amaretz. He's called an Amaretz, and he has certain disqualifications for certain things. That's called an Amaretz. And Omar Rav Huna says halacha k'acherim. And Ula says the law follows its last opinion. The last opinion of Achirim. If a person went ahead, even if you studied Chumash, Mishnah, but if you don't understand the reason behind things, then you're Amoretz. And the reason for that is because if you only learn the Mishnah and you don't learn the Gemara, so you're not going to know how to apply the law, because you're going to think, you're going to compare different cases to the Mishnah, but you don't realize that the reason for the law is because of A, B, and C, and therefore you're going to come to a wrong conclusion in the halacha. You're not going to know halacha properly if you do not understand what's behind the law. Therefore, you have to know what's behind the law. So therefore, that's called an am ha'aretz, someone who did not learn under a rabbi, under a teacher to explain him the meaning of the law, and so on and so forth. Should we continue a few more minutes? If people have time. It's a little late. I don't want to hold people late. So, because we started late, I want to wish everyone a beautiful a beautiful day. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in. Have a great day,
Have
everybody.
a great day.
תודה
Thank you.
רבה. תודה רבה.
Good to see everybody.
להתראות.
Thank you. Good to see you. How you doing?
How's everything?
It's been a long time. Shmuel, have
Little
a great
bit.
day. What'd you say?
להתראות.
You
Baruch
too.
Hashem. Yes, well.
Okay, good to see you. Good to hear you.
Good to be seen.
Have a great day.
You too. It's Lacha.
Thank you very much. We usually start around 8:30, depending on the day.
Yeah.
Monday and Thursday, 8:40.